Hello, and welcome to today's session on turning your SAP supply chain solution into a working asset for your company. Really excited to be here. I'm David Wascom. I'm the Senior Vice President of Executive Programs and Head of Content here at ASUG. And I've been able to host these sessions this summer, and we've had a lot of great conversations, a lot of great content. Today we're really wrapping it up by looking at specific customer story around the sessions. I want to recap first what we've had so far this summer. We've had 4 sessions already. First session was a fireside chat with Martin Rowan, the managing partner at Reveal, specifically looking at the state of the supply chain. Martin and I had a fantastic conversation there. Session number 2 was driving manufacturing and operational excellence. Session 3 was driving inventory optimization and increasing turns on your inventory. Session 4 was allowing your supply chain to let you make and keep promises to your customers. And again, today we're really tying it all together by looking at how GECurrent, a provider of advanced lighting and intelligent controls, has been able to turn their SAP solution into a valuable asset for running and managing their supply chain operations. Today, we're going to be joined by Mark Leclerc, the CIO at GECurrent, Martin Rowan, the managing partner at Reveal, and Jeff Scott, the CEO here at ASUG, as they dive deeper into the supply chain story at GECurrent. So with that said, Jeff, take it away.
Thank you, David. I want to begin our conversation today with an understanding of supply chain challenges overall and challenges that we have heard from the SAP community specifically. Here's what we know today about the supply chain. First, disruptions are constant, and sometimes they're extreme and they have varying levels of extreme. Our first statistic around this is, according to Accenture, 94% of Fortune 1000 companies are seeing supply chain disruptions. They started during the pandemic and they have not eased up given the current geopolitical climate that we are all operating within. The second statistic is that according to Gartner research, 42% of supply chain leaders are under pressure to maintain current margins of profitability and achieve targets for sustainability, speed, and innovation. And doing this all while we are operating in an inflationary economy that, if you observe the stock market, seems to be extremely wobbly. Third, also according to Gartner, 43% of enterprises will continue to digitize and integrate innovative technologies, and that'll cause supply chains to actually positively have to continually adapt. Finally, according to McKinsey, on average, global container shipping rates have more than quadrupled since 2019, and schedule delays have risen along with those. In some key trading routes, such as Asia-Europe and Asia-North America, the rates of spikes are even higher and the delays are far more frequent. So that sets a nice kind of beginning conversation about what we're seeing in our supply chains today. And these are things that are really indicating that organizations need to stop being overly reactive to disruptions and really bring the idea of agility into play, because we think that these types of disruptions will continue into the foreseeable future. To better plan for and react to disruptions, organizations again need to accelerate their timely and relevant data and metrics. Here's what we know from our community. Organizations require alternative options and ways to make and ship goods locally and make them sustainable. We see organizations are increasing their investments in technology and in SAP. And they're doing this through a single source of truth in data and reporting. And this is something that comes up over and over again, the idea of needing a single source of truth, because we don't have the time to figure out which source of truth is the right source of truth. And alternative supply chain options need to be available through the various SAP business networks. And all of this comes together with the requirement for increased automation to maximize efficiency of technology and to make the best use of skill sets from our staffs. Mark, I want to begin with you. How well does this information align with what you're experiencing at GECurrent Lighting?
Yeah, that was a pretty mild statement, Jeff.
You've seen it all, Mark, haven't you?
Unfortunately, we've seen more than our share. We buy a lot of product overseas, and real-time data is helping us try to figure out how do we keep up with the pace of change that's happening in the market. You got pricing, availability, lead time, shipping containers, you name it. Those are all dynamics that are changing on a moment-to-moment basis. And some of us have seen ships sitting in the harbor waiting to dock, and those are big problems for us.
I think, Mark, if I listed down all of the issues we're all seeing in supply chains, I would take this entire session and never have to talk to you and Martin. So I think that we're all seeing different variations of this. I'm curious, when you speak with your business partners and you talk about these in your staff meetings and your executive meetings, is there any one of these that really rise to the top?
Yeah, it's the price of material, whether it's the distribution aspects of it or actually the materials themselves. We're doing sourced finished goods that are overseas. We're doing component level purchases from overseas, but so those prices are fluctuating. But all of our distribution costs are changing. And if I was to target one specific item, I think we're concerned about lead times of getting things and more around distribution costs. Those are probably the primary focuses for us, for sure.
Martin, let me turn to you for a moment because you see this across multiple clients. What are you seeing and what do you think that SAP is doing, and where do you see SAP technologies helping your clients maneuver through all these complexities?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think the Mark hit the nail on the head, right? It's prevalent and it's everywhere. I think the frustrating part for us that's been in this business now for 20 plus years is to think about it is not a new thing. This is something that's been around for some time. The disruption levels are just different, right? Sometimes, it's a shipping issue, or it's a copper shortage somewhere in the world, or it's, this terrorist attack that cuts off this line of supply. Whatever it is, there's always been a disruption. I think the pandemic has just given us a really worldwide one-time event that's affected the entire human race, right? And therefore, all of this has become really apparent. What companies are doing, though, from an SAP perspective, is they're frantically reacting as opposed to being proactive, because they haven't been able to figure out how to use the technologies the right way, sadly. And again, this goes back to the 90s. For most of us that have been involved with SAP for that long have seen it. And so unfortunately, we haven't had the opportunity to really let the technology drive a lot of the benefits. Now, SAP is doing a lot to bring new technologies to the table. Their BTP products and their cloud-based products are all really helping create agility. But agility really only matters if your business processes are agile too. And so we'll probably get into that a little bit more. But yeah, unfortunately, I think companies have struggled to really keep up with the change.
Martin, you make a very valid point, right? We thought that we would maneuver through the pandemic, and post-pandemic, things would get better. And that's only now been replaced with other geopolitical instability, right? We look at kind of what's happening in Europe and what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and it introduces yet a whole nother set of constraints. So at your point really being that the constraints are always going to change, the disruption is really the constant.
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, right? And it's not just a constant, it's almost, our ability to keep up with that change and allow the change to happen, and then for us to capitalize on the change, that's really what key, right? I mean, I think that's where Mark and them have done such an amazing job, is be able to see where the market has changed and then actually, benefit from it. That really is making organizations more beneficial, obviously from a shareholder value point of view, stakeholder point of view, employee perspective, everything. But if we're reactive and we're not thinking in that way, we are going to find ourselves flat-footed.
Mark, I want to come back to you. You were in a situation with you and your organization and your peers where you saw that there was an opportunity to use your SAP investment differently to get to some business outcomes that you needed to get to. So can you tell us the reason why you thought you had an opportunity to do some transformation here?
Yeah, for sure, Jeff. We tend to put systems in, and then we don't leverage them to be used the way they're intended to be used. We think we're smarter than these systems sometimes. And that's what we proved ourselves very clearly on through this effort. And frankly, the teams were literally allowing SAP to have its master data in the way that they were putting it into the system, but they wouldn't let the system actually work and do the job itself that it was intended to do. So they would take that master data out, they'd put it in 9 million spreadsheets, they'd manipulate that data, and then we'd put it back in and say, here, the spreadsheet's telling us what it needs to do.
Right.
And we didn't let that system say, hey, wait a minute, it's telling you order this on this day when you hit to this level, and you can meet your demand that you're looking at. So we thought it was really important to get back to the basics and, frankly, use SAP the way it was intended to be used and allow the system to do the job that we had 30 people doing spreadsheets doing. And when we took advantage of that, boy, we saw some great results. And frankly, we were able to repurpose some people to do things that were more value add to the organization than manipulating data and trying to figure out and be smarter than a system. So that was the eye opener for us, was all these people doing all these spreadsheets. And then on top of all that, we had this pandemic hit us, and we had to be more nimble. And it took people a long time to figure out how to do that stuff in spreadsheets. You can't be that nimble that way. But you could certainly look at a dashboard in SAP and allow it to tell you what you need to do, and trust it. Trust it.
So, Mark, I want to make sure I understand. Are you suggesting that you really shouldn't run your supply chain through a series of spreadsheets that multiple people have access to? Because that's really the way most organizations do run. So I'm shocked to hear you be counterintuitive to what we've all come to know.
We should focus on our demand and our processes and leverage that and let the system do the work for you. That's why we put them in.
So Martin, how often do you move into client organizations where they're operating just as Mark described his organization?
Yeah, I love the spreadsheet comment just because I think it was McKinsey that said, this is the time for the spreadsheet jockeys to drop their spreadsheets. And I think something like over 67% of people use spreadsheets for planning tools. So if I come back to, Mark's point earlier about, use the system as intended, it's no different than us buying a smartphone, right, to make phone calls only. It kind of, you kind of miss the point a little bit. And a big theme of this whole entire series so far has been about, if you start thinking of SAP as an asset, you're not going to underutilize it. You spend a lot of money running this thing, putting it in place. This is similar than buying a manufacturing piece of equipment and just letting it sit on 10, 20, 30% utilization. So when we go into organizations, we want to measure that utilization. We want to go, where do we stand? And I think when we worked with Mark and them specifically, we found that they were probably very transactionally rich. I mean, they use a lot of the transactions, but they were underutilizing its capabilities and planning capabilities in particular, close to 30, 40%. And there was just such a lot of upside to it. And I think the sad part about it, to your question, Jeff, is that that's probably 80% of the companies out there. That's not uncommon.
So, Martin, I'm curious, where are we as technology professionals, people who've been around SAP for a long time, where are we missing this? Where is it happening that our business partners constantly deflect off into a spreadsheet solution instead of pulling back and saying, you know what, I think we can get more out of our SAP solutions if we do these things. What's your view?
It's called the implementation trap. As simple as that. It's you go in, you implement, we have a set budget, we have a set time, we only bring a certain level of knowledge together, which is dependent on the consultants. We bring the business knowledge together, which is dependent on what we've been doing for the last 30 years. And then we get it in. And maybe if we're lucky, we get a couple days of training in, if you're lucky, 2 weeks. And then it's kind of like, okay, good luck, run your business. And very quickly, a few months into it, people are like, I can't find this, I need this, and the peer pressure comes up, from above saying we need to ship things, and slowly but surely we revert back to the things we do. So it's the lack of training or education, the lack of change management, the lack of adoption, and it's not I need the system to be easier or look better for me to adopt it. It's for me to better understand what it's doing and how it's going to make life easier. And to Mark's point, let it do the work for me. If we get that utilization up, it could do 70, 80% of the job. We really just have to focus on the things and the exceptions that occur.
So when you first, thought about Mark's set of challenges and business challenges, and Martin, these are things you see all the time.
Right.
What is your process that your team goes about to kind of start to decouple this and really start to understand how to put this SAP asset into better use? Because my understanding is your belief is that this isn't about massive amounts of IT enablement that need to occur. This is about just understanding the base software better.
Very much so. So we take a maturity model approach. So we say if you're kind of on the high end of the use of SAP to meet your business goals, we call that business maturity, then you're on the 4 and 5 levels of your business. So you're optimizing, you're setting targets, you're gaining value. But there's 5 levels, right? And what we find is that most companies kind of settle somewhere between 1 and 3. And part of our analysis or assessment is to literally go into the system and pull the data and not argue, points of view, but really just use the data as is and say, okay, where do you sit on this continuum, 5-level continuum? And, it was a very big eye-opener for Mark and his team. It was a big eye-opener for the supply chain guys, because they all thought they may be on the higher end, maybe 3 to 4, because, they're a spin-off of GE. They've used many technologies before. We're the big GE company, right? And then they realized, well, maybe they're in the 2 range and there's a little bit of movement to go. So that's how we do it.
It's okay, Martin. We were at the 0 level. I remember the conversation.
Well, okay, 1 to 2, maybe,
I mean, Mark, give yourself a little bit of credit, right?
Okay, 0.5 level.
Okay.
No, and this was the reality for Mark and Current, right? Is that they had a technology that actually worked. They didn't need to re-implement it. It actually was configured fairly well. The lack of knowledge of using it with basic supply chain principles and practices where the shortcoming was, and then applying it in the system.
So Martin, how much of when you think about this is process versus technology versus people and skilling?
So I would say it's majority people and skilling, right? Then process, and then system. And the reason I put it in that order is because in our mind, if you're using SAP's best practices, that is your process. So they're not really 2 different things, right? It's kind of like if I use it the way it is designed, then that is my process. So then I really need to focus on the people side of things to say, where do they not understand how it works? And that comes down to basic, simple things like transactional excellence. Do I even understand the importance of closing a document out? If I don't have a sales order and I haven't closed it for 2 years, is that still a relevant sales order? Probably not. But the technology is unaware of it, and it keeps saying, well, we need to make it, that sales order's got a demand for us. Or I have a 2-year-old purchase order, and SAP just says, hey, I'm expecting it today. And today comes around, and tomorrow it's going to say expect it tomorrow, right? And it's just, and then people get to the point where they get frustrated and they go like, this is not real data. Let me go to my spreadsheet where I can filter that out and then, give you, and it's like, well, no, the root cause is let's clean up the data.
It's that reflex reaction, Martin, to always go to the spreadsheet. Is that
Yes.
what you're thinking? Is it's about, hey, the spreadsheet's it's accessible. I know how to use it. I can write some great formulas. Let me start to migrate into there, and that's where the first drip happens, right?
That's where the first drip happens, and that drip or drift, either way, starts just getting worse, right? So 10 years down the road, when you hire Sally to come take on the new job that John used to do, John's going to go, here's how we do our process. We do D3 transaction SAP, then we go to this spreadsheet, then we do these 5 things, and then we come back. And now suddenly, that's the company's process. And so we've drifted so far away, it now becomes the process. Best practice.
So Mark, I want to come back to you and take you as a real-world example of how you modernized, how you were using SAP to manage your supply chain. So we've talked about problem identification. Now, where did you go from there?
Martin was touching on some of these things. We had to get our team educated. The example he just used where you got a new employee that comes in or somebody else that comes in from another department, and they're doing these transactions because that's what they were taught how to do and what to do. What they don't realize is the downstream and upstream impacts of those transactions, and if they don't do it properly, what those really generate up and downstream. And what we had to do is really sink our teeth into some educational time and invest in our employees a little bit more. And that's when we reached out to Martin and his team and said, hey, look, give us the opportunity to educate these folks on how to use the system properly, educate them on the impacts of the changes that they make or the adjustments they make within the system, so that they all know what it means, and then they can work in tandem together all the way through the system and allow the system to enable it. So, the impact that we had is really the investment in our people. Quite frankly, we didn't make any investment in the technology. Martin, we put a couple configuration changes in them to enable some things to work, but it was truly the investment in the people and educating them on how best to use the system they have sitting in front of them.
And educate them on using that single source of truth that Jeff called out in the beginning, right? Is just having them capitalize on what they have, right? It's the old adage of just use what you have and exploit it. I think you called it out very well, though, Mark, and that is that people get lost in the complexity of what they think the process is versus just trying to use some standard capabilities and rather adjust the process to fit the technology than the other way around. That's another big trap, of course.
Yeah, and in today's ever-changing landscape that we're sitting in, we talked about all the challenges in supply chain, right? You got to have real-time data and accurate data to be able to shift with the business when the wind blows a little bit. Right. And you can't do that in a spreadsheet. You have to do that through your real-time data sitting in your systems to be able to make the changes you need on the fly.
Martin, we've talked about SAP as an asset. We've talked about supply chain agility. We've talked about that this isn't a huge transformation that requires tens of thousands of hours of high-priced consultants. What do you think are the three essential things that you need to do, that we as customers need to do to turn an SAP system into an asset?
Oh, wow, what a brilliant question. I think there's a fundamental philosophical decision first. And it comes down to believing that SAP is a way of doing business. That's really critical, right? Just to get philosophically there. Secondly, then to be able to use the technology as a lever to be able to adjust the business. And as the slide kind of speaks to, it's going from being a good supply chain, i.e. a resilient supply chain, to a great supply chain, which we refer to as an agile supply chain. Because resilience just means, it just bounces back to the way it was. It usually takes a lot of effort, a lot of energy. People often think of re-implementing the technology to do that. Where if you're a great supply chain and you've got that mindset where I can just turn and change the levers within the technology, that allows me to make quick, fast changes, adjust fast, see the results, like it or not like it, and then fail fast or succeed fast, either way, and make those constant changes. And that is what gave Current also the ability to weather the pandemic, is that they came out the other side incredibly powerful to capitalize on some of this, not only from a process perspective and the improvements they saw, but also the ability to change on a dime to be able to address some of these challenges.
Thank you, Martin, for that. Mark, I want to ask you the same question. What do you think were the three key things that turned your former implementation into what you have now, and had you think about this, and more importantly, your business peers think about it as an asset?
Yeah, Jeff, I feel like I'll repeat some of the things that we've talked about already, but organizations need to leverage the tool the way it's intended to be used, and you need to make sure that you put the investment in your organization and the people to be able to how to use it and educate them through that process. Those are two very key components to it. And then the education doesn't stop. You have to continuously go through that continuum, if you will, on the maturity curve that Martin talked about. Continue to grow and develop and become that level 5 competency level from a business process model perspective. and you'll see your inventories significantly improve, your turns will significantly improve, and I think you'll make progress without question on the bottom line. We certainly saw significant change and impact by doing those few things.
Mark, I want to stay with you if I can for just a moment and just ask you, what are the key things you would tell your peers through ASUG that you've learned through this process that may not be completely obvious? And then before you answer that, Martin, I'm going to ask you the same question, so just get ready for it. But Mark, back to you.
Yeah, I think if I was sitting at a round table with a bunch of my peers, I'd certainly make sure that they understand that the changes that you have to make in an organization aren't always an IT change. They're processes and tools, and how do you use them. When you make the investment of education into the teams, you'll see a pretty significant change in them. They'll feel more valued as employees, and you'll get more results out of the systems themselves. So don't shortcut that process of the implementation of education, and don't shortcut the process of knowledge as it relates to the end-to-end vision of those business processes. Make sure you put the time in on those things. Make sure you make that investment in the people, and leverage the system the way it was intended.
Martin, same question to you.
Yeah, I love the investment in the people concept, but I would add, though, that, obviously with S4HANA imminent and everybody's moving towards that, one of the things that we're seeing companies do more and more of, and I see the benefit is that they're trying to kind of correct what they have first, kind of do what Mark and them did, right? Let's invest in the people, let's optimize the supply chain, let's get the data to work for us, etc. And then migrate to S4. One, you take away a tremendous amount of the risk. Your change management is much less. And more importantly, the cost of going to a greenfield versus a migration is significantly less, right, if you migrate. And so one of the things I would recommend as we talk to some of our peers would be think about the investment of your people, see the benefit of that, like Current and them saw incredible benefits out of it. And then you've now teed your organization up to be mature enough to actually accept the S4 capabilities and improvements that it brings to the table.
So Mark and Martin, if I take anything away from our conversation this afternoon, this really starts with people, right? It's not about technology. It's not about process. They can help. But if we really get the people part of this right, we will actually get to the solutions and the business benefits we're looking for. So Mark, back to you for a moment. Let's talk about people. And let's talk about some key skills that you think our modern day supply chain moderators / shepherders need to have.
Was that for me, Jeff? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was a long question, Mark, but yeah, that's okay.
Oh my gosh,
you were thinking about your supply chain at the moment when I asked the question. So
yeah, no.
Let me, if you might, I'll ask it again. Yeah. We're talking about people, Mark. What is it about people? What are the key skills that you think we need to make sure that our teams are absolutely good at?
Look, they have to be the ability to have the open mind, right? And have the attitude of success. Unfortunately, we can't teach the attitude side of things, but we can certainly teach them how to use the system. And those are the things that, I would look for in those people. And quite frankly, allow the system to be used again in ways that they're maybe the way they didn't do things before, and see the success that happens. Sometimes you need a little proof point. And when you look at the dashboards that are available in the system, they tell you what you need to do. And when you start to see the reflection of those changes that you're making, be confident in those and be positive in those, and it's going to happen. So that skill of being open-minded and change is going to be a real important thing, because the pace of change today is faster than it's ever going to be, or slower than it's ever going to be in the future.
Martin, I know you have a point of view on the people side of this equation. Please share it.
Jeff, I would say to you, I think the biggest enemy to people learning and growing is Google. How do I do X, Y, Z? Question mark, right? It's short-sighted. It's myopic. It doesn't usually give you the true understanding that one needs. And I think most companies do that, right? If you don't know, you Google. We all do that. But you should not try
Hundreds
to
of
run
times
your
a day, yeah.
yeah. But you should not try to solve your most complex supply chain problems, or try and run your business, or try and optimize a process by Googling, a question here and there. So that comes down to, how do you fundamentally then, to Mark's point, tap into that attitude and openness and get them to actually make that change. And that truly is a side-by-side learning kind of approach. And that's really the only way that it really happens. It's learning by doing, right? You don't just get taught that. You actually have to show how you're going to see the benefits. And the only way to know if it's really working is if you actually see the business benefit, right? Otherwise, what's the point? Then let's just not change. It's easier not to change then. So you have to have measurable benefits coming out of it too.
You can do that training internally, Jeff, but you also have to leverage and tap into the external resources like Martin and that team to really bring the experts to bear to make sure that training's resonating and it's getting in there and it's sticking.
Martin, I want to come back to your comment about Google, and it's just a fact of life now. We all Google everything, and I made a quick aside as you were talking. I probably use Google 100 times a day, right? It answers all questions. So here's my challenge to you. How do we harness that idea and make sure that we can actually turn it to good? So what's the way that we can Googleize, and I don't mean it quite that way, the complexities of our supply chain? Maybe we need to do a better job as process owners and technology owners of somehow creating a way for people to get to that essential nugget of answer through a sea of stuff they're just not going to read.
I think there's definitely a place for that. I think it's a question of timing. Do you do it when you're still in the quagmire of not understanding how this works for you? Or do you do it when you're mature enough to actually do something about it? And I think that's the difference. I'll come back to the 5 levels of the maturity. If you're on 1 and 2, Google's not going to solve your problems. There's some fundamentals at place, right? I have data integrity issues. I have master data issues. I don't understand what I don't understand. The configuration is not done. I've got customizations up the yin yang, right? However, if I'm in 4 and 5, kind of where Mark and their team is now, absolutely. AI, machine learning, Googleizing it, what is series, that can help you kind of see the benefit. Because now the system's doing the fundamentals for you, and you can trust the data. So the result actually is meaningful. And I believe there's definitely a place for that in the future, for sure. But it requires a solid foundation.
Martin, one of the things that you're really, really passionate about is the concept of resilience versus agility. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, very much. It's kind of like that slide I showed earlier. It's just, to me, it comes down to agility is what really makes you benefit from a system like SAP. If you trust the data and your transactional excellence is in place and people know what they're doing, you can make unbelievable shifts in your business process and your models without having to do major lifts. And we've seen it over and over. Mark's a good example of that. It really gives you the benefit. And then not only is it a long-term play, we've seen customers over and over again actually benefit from these changes that they can do so rapidly. Flipping from equipment that's not selling anymore because of the pandemic to suddenly chemical products that are selling through the roof because everybody needs cleaning and chemical equipment, and being able to make that business model change within weeks or days as opposed to months is radical. And that's what the tools and technologies and understanding can bring to us if we understand agility. So agility to me, is key. I don't think resilience should be our goal. I believe agility should be our goal. Resilience is table stakes.
Martin, Mark, I want to thank you for your conversation today. This is really the essential part of listening as an SAP community and sharing customer experiences in our research, which helps all of us move together and learn from each other. We've talked about digital transformations, that they're not a simple or easy task, but the benefits of these transformations can be incredibly tremendous. And we've seen benefits such as faster access to analytics and reporting, ability to react more quickly to new business demands and disruptions to the supply chain, improve customer service experience across all of your channels, and of course, greater supply chain visibility, which is what the heart of what we've been talking about today. Martin, Mark, I want to thank you for sharing your insights, coming together with me today and sharing your stories. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having us, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Good seeing you, Jeff.
Mark, are you there? Martin, sorry.
Yes. Hey, David, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing today?
Good, good, good. Can you see me?
I sure can. How about here?
Yes. Yes, I
Man,
can.
great wrap for the series on supply chain we've done this summer. So first, let me thank you and your team at Reveal for being able to provide this insight to our membership. It's been great.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. It's been quite an amazing series.
Absolutely. And I think we've got a lot of great feedback and a lot of ongoing consumption of the content, which is always a good measure of success for this kind of thing. People are interested in the topic. So as we kind of wrap here, first off, let me say, anyone who's on today, please, if you've got questions, stick them in the chat, stick them in the Q&A. Happy to pull those forward and make sure that we get those asked to Martin. But a couple of things, right, just to kind of follow up, now that we're sort of at the end of this, right, tell me a little bit about the issue of maturity, right? So we talked about this with Mark in the conversation and kind of where we are from a process execution, a process optimization, whatever measure you want to put on there. How can you have that conversation with people in the business? I mean, I've been there, right? I was a former CIO, and to have to sit down with someone in what for us was logistics or for procurement, and have that hard conversation about, hey guys, look, I know you like that spreadsheet, or I know you like how this worked in our 30-year-old legacy system, but it's time for us to move on. Right? How do you have that conversation?
That's such a good question and such a relevant one right now, because a lot of people are struggling with that, right? So the business executives are realizing they're struggling. So they kind of look at inventory, they look at service level, they look at the business indicator and go like, something's off, and either in a good way where they got too much demand and not enough supply, or sometimes the opposite, which is usually not as good. But they don't necessarily know where to go look for these challenges. Then you get down to the user community, and they can see the challenge, right? They can see the lack of visibility. They know that a lot of the data that they're looking for is sitting in a spreadsheet, but they don't know how to communicate that back up. And so it is a challenging discussion, especially if you haven't had that with the business, because you've got to be able to connect. How does this master data field actually impact your business? At that level of conversation. And it's difficult. It really is. So I think there's a couple ways. One is there's a maturity continuum we talked about. It's on our website, and people can print that and kind of self-evaluate. We also have a self-assessment, which is like a 20-question thing, and it'll actually give you a score. And then you can take the report. It's a 3 or 4 page report with some key next steps for you to take with your executives, and it may be quite helpful. And then I would say the third one is just to rally with somebody that's going to be able to help you articulate the business outputs of those changes. And that is harder to do, especially internally, because as the saying goes, the prophet doesn't always come from his own town, right? So you may have to look for external help, but either way, it's trying to develop that burning platform for people to know what to do.
Fantastic. So as you look at the kind of the state of the supply chain world today, and all the chaos that's come up in the last 3 years, do you see any kind of the current challenges, or are we going to be able to set some of these aside? Say, hey, I've won that battle. And what do you think those battles are going to be? Or are we just say, no, this is just something this is the new normal. We're going to have to fight this one until my kids are going to fight this after I'm gone, whatever the case may be.
Yeah. No, and it's kind of, I said this too in the talk, right? Is that firstly, I don't see it changing. Um, what changes is probably a different question. But we supply chains have had disruptions for 30, 40, 50 years, right? It's not a new thing. As we're going into higher inflation, maybe the demand's going to slow down, and now we're going to have inventory issues because we've been making too much. In 6 months, 12 months ago, we didn't find enough suppliers, so we had to do multi-sourcing and implement multi-sourcing capabilities. And maybe 2 years ago, we had to put in custom allocations and only give a certain amount to certain customers based on priorities and availability. And that may all change in 6 months from now based on where the economy is going. But either way, we're going to have to adjust, which just comes back to the argument of you have to be agile. You can't go back to the way you were 2 years ago or 6 months ago. You actually have to continually see these as opportunities to improve. And then if you're agile and you're listening to the system signals and it's proactively communicating to you where the potential challenges are, you can really and truly adjust your supply chain and benefit from it. I shared an example of a company in Chicago who literally flipped from equipment to cleaning chemicals in a handful of weeks because the market changed through the whole pandemic, right? And they were able to do it by just adjusting the master data and the bills of materials and the production lines and the planning strategies and a couple settings, and suddenly the entire business model changed, where it went from a 5% of their revenue to 80% of their revenue in 4 weeks. That's not typically doable unless you can use the system in such an agile way.
Yeah, to your point, right? You got to be able to, if the system's not going to be able to support the data feeds and the information you're trying to change, then, unless you've written a really good spreadsheet.
And unfortunately, that spreadsheet is potentially could be corrupted. It could get lost. It's in your laptop and not on somebody else's. Nobody has visibility. It's all of those challenges that come with it. But sadly, I think we still run our business on that.
No, that's right up there with who's got the right spreadsheet, who's got the right data, right? That's kind of the two things that really run a lot of businesses. So yeah. So I want to, in your experience with Mark Leclerc and your work with him at GECurrent, and if we can extrapolate this to kind of the audience, right? What's sort of is there one key thing, or there's one kind of most important thing? If you're going to take one thing away that you need to focus on from a transformation of your supply chain, this is it.
Yeah. I think if I consider GECurrent in specifically, and I think they use these words, and I think I'll use them as well as the one thing, is they said, 20 years ago, we invested in our technology, i.e. implementing SAP and everything else that comes with it. And basically, they came together as a leadership team and says, it's now time for us to invest in our people. And that was a big fundamental shift, right? It's like the technology is the catalyst for everything we do, but it's not the be all and end all. It's how we as human beings actually adjust and adapt and use this technology. I use my cell phone as an example in the talk, right? If you don't use it properly, it's pretty much a very heavy paperweight, right? Yeah. But if you can use it and capitalize on it, then it's really, and so investing in your people really means teaching them, educating them, raising their level of knowledge so that they can use the technology to benefit themselves and the business. So I love that phrase that they use. And I would say if there's one thing, it's fundamentally making the principal decision, I want to invest in our people. If you do that, then the next steps follow pretty easily after that.
Yeah, to your point about, investing in the people to be able to manage that, what's ultimately sort of changed, right? Technology, investing in technology doesn't magically transform your industry. It doesn't magically transform your business. It doesn't magically transform your department, wherever you want to draw that line. Ultimately it's about how the technology supports what your people are doing to drive your business.
Yep. Exactly right.
Fantastic. Well, Martin, again, thank you very much for your time, for your team's time over the last several weeks with this series. For for members, for ASUG, please take advantage of this. This content is available to you on demand. Just jump onto asug.com and you can search for this through, search for supply chain, search for reveal. They'll pop up. You can go back and watch all of these series. Great content. I know I'm not actively involved in managing SAP anymore, but there have been a couple things I've gone back to watch just to kind of, relive some old memories and kind of answer some questions that I've had in the past. So there's great stuff there. It's just a matter of taking advantage of it. So again, Martin, thank you very much. Thanks to Jeff. Thanks to Mark Leclerc today. Thanks to everyone who's been a part of this event. Any last words, Martin?
Yeah, I would just say, Dave, thanks to you for facilitating this series. You've been an amazing moderator, and being coming from the business side, i.e. CIO and CIO back in the past, I think it's been incredible insights that you've brought to it. So thank you for that. And yeah, and for the audience, this is, if there's one takeaway I'd say is if you can wrap your head around this notion that SAP is an asset and not just a tool, you can really make a difference in your business.
Absolutely. All right, well, Martin, we're going to go ahead and wrap. Again, thank you very much. Great talking to you as always. Looking forward to seeing you in person next time I'm up in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
And we will all talk again real soon. Thank you all for your time today.
Thanks, David. See you later.